The first scream split the dawn like a thunderclap, but Olivia Summers might as well have been shouting into an empty canyon. Her desperate pleas echoed through Madisonville, Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1875, bouncing off storefronts and saloon windows, yet not a single soul stirred to her aid. She stood in the middle of the dusty Main Street, her copper hair falling from its careful arrangement, face flushed with panic as she pointed toward the bank where masked men were loading saddlebags with cash. "Please, they're robbing the bank. My father's inside." Olivia's voice grew hoarse as townsfolk peered from windows, then quickly drew their curtains. A few men lounging outside the saloon merely shook their heads and turned away. In Madisonville, folks minded their own business, especially when trouble involved the territory's most notorious gang. Olivia spun in a circle, her emerald green dress swirling around her ankles as desperation clawed at her throat. Her father, the bank manager, had opened early to help a customer, and now he was surely being held at gunpoint. The sound of a horse's hooves pounding against packed earth made her turn, hope flickering briefly before dying. It was probably just another citizen fleeing the scene, but the rider didn't pass by. Instead, the tall figure on horseback pulled his chestnut stallion to a stop beside her. Dust billowed around them as the stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. Unlike the other men in town who averted their eyes, this one looked directly at her. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Olivia could see eyes as blue as a mountain lake studying her with calm intensity. "Madam." He removed his hat and bowed slightly, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "I hear you." Those three simple words nearly buckled Olivia's knees. After minutes of desperate shouting, someone had finally acknowledged her cries. "They're robbing the bank," she repeated, her voice cracking. "My father's inside. Please, no one will help." The stranger nodded once, replaced his hat, and turned toward the bank. His movements were unhurried but purposeful as he adjusted the gun belt at his hip. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and steady. "What's your name, miss?" Olivia Summers." "Miss Summers, I'm Jackson Gentry." He offered a brief, reassuring smile that barely touched his lips but warmed his eyes. "I'll get your father out." As Jackson moved toward the bank, Olivia noticed the silver star pinned to his weathered vest. A marshal. Providence had sent a lawman to Madisonville on this very morning, though the town hadn't seen one in months. Inside the bank, Theodore Summers stood perfectly still behind the counter, watching with growing horror as three masked men emptied the safe. The youngest robber, barely more than a boy, kept a trembling pistol aimed at his chest. "Hurry it up, boys," barked the tallest outlaw, clearly the leader. "Town's dead as a doornail, but we ain't taking chances." Theodore thought of Olivia, who he'd sent to fetch coffee from the general store just minutes before the robbery began. Thank God she wasn't here. The lead robber approached him, pressing a gun barrel against his temple. "You got any more hidden away, old man? Secret compartments? Speak up now." Theodore shook his head, sweat trickling down his back. "That's everything. I swear it." The outlaw's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "Better be telling the truth. I'd hate to leave your body as a message to other bankers who might get clever ideas." The front door creaked open and every head turned. A tall man stood in the threshold, backlit by the morning sun, one hand resting casually on his gun. "Gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice carrying a calm authority that filled the room, "I believe you're conducting business hours a bit early. Why don't you put those bags down and raise your hands? Who the hell are you?" The lead robber snarled, swinging his gun toward the doorway. "Marshal Jackson Gentry." The lawman stepped fully into the bank, revealing the badge on his chest. And you boys have about 5 seconds to surrender before things get unpleasant." The leader laughed harshly. "One lawman against 3 of us. Those odds don't favor you, Marshal." Jackson's expression didn't change. "I've faced worse." What happened next occurred so quickly Theodore could barely follow it. The leader fired first, his shot going wide as Jackson drew and fired in one smooth motion. The leader crumpled, clutching his shoulder. The second outlaw got off 2 wild shots before Jackson's bullet found his gun arm. The youngest robber dropped his weapon instantly, raising his hands. "Don't shoot! Please don't shoot!" Outside, Olivia heard the gunfire and clutched her hands to her mouth, stifling a scream. Townspeople began cautiously emerging from buildings, watching as the bank door opened again. Jackson appeared first, pushing 2 wounded outlaws ahead of him while a third, younger one followed with his hands raised. "Someone fetch Doc Miller," Jackson called, and for the first time, people moved to help. Then Olivia saw her father emerge, pale but unharmed, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Papa!" "Oh, thank God!" Theodore hugged his daughter tightly. "I'm fine, Livy, thanks to the marshal here." Olivia turned, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as she looked at Jackson. "Thank you. When no one would listen, when everyone turned away, you heard me." Jackson nodded, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen, Miss Summers." In that moment, as the morning sun bathed Madisonville's dusty street in golden light, neither Olivia nor Jackson could have imagined how those words would echo through the months to come, or how their lives had just become irrevocably entwined. By evening, Madisonville buzzed with excitement over the thwarted robbery. The saloon overflowed with townspeople eager to recount the day's events, each version growing more dramatic than the last. Marshal Gentry had dispatched his prisoners to the county jail in Cheyenne with a deputy who happened to be passing through, but he remained in town, much to the locals' surprise. Olivia found him at the hotel's small dining room, sitting alone at a corner table. She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of her hastily arranged hair and the simple blue dress she'd changed into after the morning's chaos. Jackson looked up, spotting her before she could retreat. "Miss Summers," he said, standing as she approached, "I trust your father is resting well." "He is, thank you." Olivia clasped her hands together to keep them from fidgeting. Doc Miller gave him something to calm his nerves, though he insisted he was perfectly fine. Jackson gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Would you care to join me? I've just ordered." Olivia nodded and sat down, aware of curious glances from other diners. A woman dining alone with a man who wasn't family would normally cause gossip, but today's events had earned her some leeway. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, once the waitress had taken her order. "What you did today was brave beyond measure." Jackson's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes warmed. "Just doing my duty, madam." "Even so," Olivia pressed, "when everyone else turned away, you acted. Why were you in Madisonville today, Marshal?" "We haven't had a lawman visit in months." Jackson took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Tracking those men. They've hit 3 banks across the territory. I'd been following their trail for nearly 2 weeks. And now you've caught them. Will you be leaving tomorrow?" Olivia asked, surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt at the thought. "Not immediately. There's paperwork to complete, statements to take." He paused, studying her face. "And I've received word that Madisonville has been without proper law enforcement for too long. The territorial governors asked me to consider staying on temporarily, at least." Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. "Here, in our town. It seems your community could use someone willing to listen when trouble comes calling," Jackson said, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation. As they ate, Olivia found herself watching Jackson the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, how his hands moved with precise efficiency, the slight furrow in his brow when he concentrated. There was something compelling about this quiet, watchful man who had appeared from nowhere when she needed help most. "May I ask something personal, Marshall?" Olivia ventured after they'd eaten in companionable silence for several minutes. "Jackson," he corrected. "And you can ask." "I might not answer." "Fair enough," she conceded with a small smile. "Where is home for you, when you're not chasing outlaws across the territory, I mean?" A shadow crossed his face. "Don't have one, strictly speaking. Been moving with the job for 8 years now." "No family waiting for your return?" The question slipped out before Olivia could consider its propriety. "None living," he replied simply, offering no further explanation. Olivia felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must be a lonely way to live." Jackson looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Until today, I'd have said it suits me fine. Now I'm not so certain." The intensity in his blue eyes made Olivia's cheeks warm. She looked away first, pretending sudden interest in straightening her cutlery. "Well, if you do stay, I hope Madisonville proves hospitable. Most days, it's quite pleasant, armed robberies notwithstanding." This earned a genuine smile from Jackson, transforming his stern features. "I'll look forward to seeing those pleasant days then." As they parted ways that evening, Olivia found herself hoping fervently that Jackson Gentry would indeed decide to stay in Madisonville. There was something about him that called to her, perhaps his unflinching courage, or the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. Whatever it was, she wanted to understand it better. "Good night, Marshall," she said as they reached the hotel lobby, "and thank you again, not just for saving my father but for hearing me when no one else would." "Good night, Miss Summers." He tipped his hat. "Some voices are impossible to ignore." The following weeks brought changes to Madisonville. Marshal Gentry took over the abandoned sheriff's office, clearing out dust and cobwebs, installing new wanted posters, and establishing regular patrols. Theodore Summers recovered fully from his ordeal and returned to managing the bank, now with improved security measures Jackson had suggested. Olivia found herself creating reasons to visit town more frequently. Whether dropping by her father's bank or volunteering at the small schoolhouse, she invariably crossed paths with the marshal. Their encounters grew from polite nods to brief conversations, then to longer discussions that left her thinking about his words long after they'd parted. One afternoon in late July, Olivia was helping organize books at the town's modest library when Jackson entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Marshal Gentry, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, greeted him. "What brings you to our humble collection? Looking for some reading material?" "Actually, I'm here on official business," he replied. "There's been word of suspicious characters seen near the Miller property outside town. I'm advising everyone to be cautious when traveling alone, especially ladies." His eyes found Olivia's across the room, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Thank you for the warning, Marshal," Mrs. Henderson said. "Olivia often rides out that way to visit the Milliken farm. Their daughter Charlotte is her dear friend." "Is that so?" Jackson approached where Olivia stood shelving books. "Miss Summers, perhaps you should postpone any visits until we've determined there's no danger. Charlotte's expecting her first child any day now," Olivia explained. "I promised to bring her some things from town tomorrow." Jackson's brow furrowed. "Then allow me to escort you. I need to patrol that area anyway." Mrs. Henderson suddenly became very interested in sorting through catalog cards, though Olivia could see the older woman's knowing smile. Town gossips had already taken note of the marshal's apparent interest in the banker's daughter. "That's kind of you, but unnecessary," Olivia said. "I've made the ride dozens of times." "Humor me," Jackson said, his tone gentle but firm. "These men we're looking for aren't the kind you'd want to encounter alone." Olivia relented, secretly pleased at the prospect of his company. "Very well. I plan to leave around 10 tomorrow morning. I'll meet you at your father's house," Jackson said with a nod, replacing his hat. "Good day, ladies." After he left, Mrs. Henderson abandoned all pretense of disinterest. "My dear, that man has eyes for you that speak volumes his lips don't say." "Mrs. Henderson," Olivia protested, feeling her cheeks burn. "The marshal is simply doing his duty." "Of course he is," the older woman replied with a wink. "Just as my Herbert was simply checking my roof for leaks every Sunday for a month before he proposed. Men find excuses to be near women who interest them." Olivia turned back to her books, unable to suppress a smile. The idea that Jackson might have personal reasons for his attentiveness was both thrilling and terrifying. At 23, she'd had suitors before, but none had affected her the way the quiet, steady marshal did. The next morning dawned clear and pleasantly warm. Olivia packed a basket with preserves, fresh bread, and baby clothes she'd sewn for Charlotte's coming child. She wore her favorite riding outfit, a practical split skirt and jacket in forest green that her father had ordered from a catalog back east. Jackson arrived precisely at 10, mounted on his chestnut stallion. He wore his usual attire: dark pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and his ever-present gun belt, but had clearly made an effort to look presentable. His face was freshly shaven, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat. "Good morning, Miss Summers," he greeted her, dismounting to help secure her basket to her saddle. "Please, after all this time, I think you might call me Olivia," she said, watching his capable hands work the leather straps. He glanced up, a smile touching his eyes. "Olivia, then." "And I'm Jackson, not Marshall, at least when we're not in town." They set off at an easy pace, riding side by side along the well-worn trail that led north from Madisonville. The morning was glorious, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and hawks circling lazily overhead. For the first mile, they rode in comfortable silence, but Olivia's curiosity eventually got the better of her. "May I ask you something, Jackson? You seem fond of asking permission to ask questions," he observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And you seem skilled at avoiding answering them," she countered with a smile. He conceded with a nod. "Fair point. What would you like to know? How did you become a marshal? You don't strike me as someone who sought out the badge." Jackson was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "I was a rancher's son in Colorado, had my own small spread by age 20. Then the war came." His jaw tightened slightly. "After 4 years of that hell, I came home to find my parents dead from influenza and my land seized for unpaid taxes. I drifted for a while, did some work as a bounty hunter. A federal marshal noticed I had a knack for tracking and offered me a badge instead." "I'm sorry about your family," Olivia said gently. "It was a long time ago," Jackson replied, though the shadow in his eyes suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. "What about you? Has Madisonville always been home?" Olivia welcomed the change of subject. "No, we moved here from St. Louis when I was 15. My mother had died the year before, and Papa thought a fresh start would do us good. He'd been offered the position at the bank, and he took it, though I think he was as surprised as anyone that I adapted so well to frontier life." "You seem very much at home here," Jackson observed. "I am. I love it, actually." Olivia smiled, gazing across the open landscape. There's a freedom here that St. Louis never offered. A woman can be more than just an ornament or a suitable match. I can ride astride instead of side saddle, help with community affairs, even assist in running the bank when Papa needs me. Your father is fortunate to have such a capable daughter. Sometimes I think he wishes I were a bit less capable and more interested in traditional feminine pursuits, Olivia admitted with a laugh. He drops hints about eligible bachelors with alarming regularity. And none have caught your interest? Jackson asked, his tone carefully neutral. Olivia glanced at him, wondering if she imagined the personal interest behind his question. The eligible bachelors of Madisonville are fine men, I'm sure, but, he prompted when she trailed off. But I've never been one to settle, she finished, meeting his gaze directly. I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't understand me. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips as if he meant to speak. Before he could, however, the crack of a gunshot split the air. Jackson reacted instantly, pulling his horse alongside Olivia's and reaching for his weapon. "Get down," he commanded, scanning the rolling hills around them. Olivia guided her mare behind a cluster of boulders, heart pounding as Jackson positioned himself protectively in front of her. Another shot rang out and dirt kicked up near their horses' hooves. "Someone's shooting from that ridge," Jackson said, pointing toward an outcropping about 200 yards away. "Stay here." "You can't go out there alone," Olivia protested. Jackson's expression was grim. "I don't have a choice. If I can circle behind them, or you could get shot before you're halfway there," she interrupted. "Let me create a distraction. I'll draw their fire while you approach from another angle." "Absolutely not," Jackson said firmly. "We don't have time to argue," Olivia insisted. "I'm an excellent rider, and I know this terrain better than you do. I can keep moving, make myself a difficult target." Jackson studied her face, clearly torn between his duty to protect her and the tactical sense her plan made. Another shot decided for him, this one coming closer. "Stay low, zigzag your path, and for God's sake, don't stop moving," he finally instructed. "Draw them toward the east so I can approach from the west. At the first sign of real danger, you ride hard for the Milliken place. Understood?" Olivia nodded, heart racing with fear and determination. "I understand." "Be careful," Jackson said, his eyes intense. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you." The naked emotion in his voice stunned her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Jackson mounted his horse and disappeared around the rock formation while Olivia took a deep breath, preparing herself. She burst from cover, riding fast and low in her saddle, deliberately making herself visible to whoever was shooting. As expected, shots followed her, but she zigzagged as Jackson had instructed, making herself a difficult target. She led her pursuers east, away from where Jackson would be approaching. Time seemed to stretch as she rode, her focus narrowed to the rhythm of her horse's hooves and the terrain ahead. She heard more gunfire, but it wasn't directed at her. Jackson must have engaged the shooters. Worry for his safety threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to keep moving. When the shooting stopped, Olivia pulled her horse to a halt behind a stand of trees, straining to hear any sound that might tell her what had happened. Minutes passed in agonizing silence before she heard hoofbeats approaching. "Olivia!" Jackson's voice called out, sending relief flooding through her. She emerged from the trees to see him riding toward her, a grim satisfaction on his face. "It's over. 2 men, the ones we'd been warned about, wanted for stagecoach robbery in Colorado. Are they?" Olivia couldn't finish the question. "One's dead. The other's wounded and tied to his horse. I'll need to take him back to town." Jackson dismounted and approached her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands trembled slightly from the receding rush of fear. "What about you?" "Bullet grazed my arm, nothing serious." He indicated a tear in his sleeve where blood had darkened the fabric. "Jackson." Olivia slid from her saddle and went to him, examining the wound with concern. "This needs cleaning and bandaging. Charlotte's place isn't far, she can help." "The prisoner can wait a few minutes while we make sure you don't bleed to death from stubbornness," Olivia insisted, her voice shaking slightly. Jackson caught her hands in his. "Hey," he said softly, ducking his head to meet her eyes. "I'm all right. I've had worse scratches shaving." The jest fell flat as Olivia struggled to contain the emotions surging through her: fear, relief, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "You could have been killed." "So could you," he countered. "That was either the bravest or most foolhardy thing I've ever seen a civilian do." "I couldn't just hide while you faced them alone," she said simply. Something changed in Jackson's expression, then a realization dawning in his eyes as he looked at her. Before either could speak, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted the moment. It was Charlotte's husband Owen, rifle at the ready. "We heard shooting." "Olivia, Marshall, are you both all right?" Jackson released Olivia's hands and turned to explain the situation. The immediacy of dealing with the wounded prisoner and ensuring Owen's family was safe pushed their personal moment aside. But Olivia could feel something had shifted between them, something neither could ignore for much longer. The incident with the outlaws became the talk of Madisonville. Some townsfolk criticized Olivia's involvement, calling it reckless and unladylike, but others, particularly the younger women, regarded her with newfound admiration. Jackson's reputation grew as well. The town that had once turned a blind eye to cries for help was now proud of its decisive marshal. For Olivia and Jackson, however, the aftermath was more complicated. Their shared brush with danger had revealed feelings both had been carefully guarding. They maintained a polite distance in public, but their eyes sought each other across rooms, and their conversations, when they occurred, carried undercurrents neither fully acknowledged. 2 weeks after the shooting, a late summer storm swept through the region. Thunder rattled windows and lightning split the sky as rain pounded Madisonville with unusual ferocity. Olivia sat in her father's study, attempting to concentrate on a ledger she was helping him balance, when a pounding at the front door startled them both. Theodore went to answer it, returning moments later with Jackson, who was drenched to the skin despite his rain slicker. "Marshal Gentry, what brings you out in such weather?" Theodore asked, gesturing for Jackson to come near the fire. "Apologies for the intrusion, Mr. Summers," Jackson said, removing his dripping hat. "The creek's rising fast. I'm advising everyone in the lower part of town to move to higher ground for the night. Your house is on the hill, so you should be fine, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation." "That's very thoughtful," Theodore said, concern creasing his brow. "The Hendersons live down by the creek. They're elderly. Have they been warned?" "I'm headed there next," Jackson confirmed, his eyes finding Olivia. "Evening, Miss Summers." "Marshal," she acknowledged, trying to ignore how the rain had plastered his shirt to his broad shoulders. Theodore glanced between them, then cleared his throat. "Olivia, why don't you fetch the marshal some coffee before he continues his rounds? It's bitter cold out there." "That's not necessary," Jackson began. "Nonsense," Theodore interrupted. "Take 5 minutes to warm up, son. The town won't wash away in that time." Theodore excused himself to fetch extra blankets for potential refugees, leaving Olivia and Jackson alone in the study. She busied herself pouring coffee from the pot kept warm on the small stove in the corner. "Thank you," Jackson said as she handed him the steaming cup. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Olivia felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. "You're soaked through," she observed. "You'll catch your death if you keep going out in this." "Hazard of the job," he replied with a slight shrug, then winced a small movement most would have missed. "Your arm is still troubling you," Olivia said, concern overriding propriety as she moved closer. Jackson shook his head. "It's nearly healed." "Let me see," she insisted, reaching for his sleeve. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps he simply didn't want to argue, but Jackson allowed her to roll up his sleeve, revealing the healing bullet graze. The wound looked clean but was obviously still tender. "You should have let Doc Miller stitch this," Olivia admonished gently. "It didn't need stitching." "Men and their stubborn pride," she muttered, carefully rolling his sleeve back down. As she did so, her fingers grazed the warm skin of his forearm, and she felt him tense at her touch. Olivia stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing and how improper it would seem if her father returned. "You should finish your coffee before it gets cold." Jackson nodded but made no move to drink. Instead, he set the cup aside and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Olivia," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to say to you." The seriousness in his tone made her heart race. "Yes." "I came to Madisonville tracking outlaws, intending to move on as soon as my job was done. I've never stayed in one place long, never wanted to." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But then I heard you calling for help when no one else would listen, and something changed." Olivia stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of his rare openness. "These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your courage and your heart." Jackson took a step closer to her. "I find myself thinking about things I haven't considered in years. A home, roots. A future that involves more than just the next assignment." "Jackson," Olivia whispered, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning correctly. "I know I have little to offer," he continued. "A lawman's life is dangerous and often lonely. But I need you to know that you've awakened something in me I thought was long dead. And if there's any chance that you might—" The study door opened as Theodore returned, arms full of blankets. Jackson stepped back immediately, his expression closing like a shutter. "Ah, Marshall, still here." "Good," Theodore said, oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "I've gathered some supplies for those who might need shelter. Would you mind taking them to the town hall when you go?" "Of course, sir," Jackson replied, his professional demeanor firmly back in place. Olivia watched, frustration building as Jackson thanked her father, gathered the blankets, and prepared to leave all without meeting her eyes again. Just as he reached the door, however, she made a decision. "Father, I should help at the town hall," she announced. "They'll need women to organize things, and I know what families might need assistance." Theodore looked surprised. "In this weather?" "I don't know, Olivia. The marshal can escort me," she said with more confidence than she felt. "It's only a few minutes' walk, and I'll be far more useful there than sitting here." Jackson finally looked at her, a question in his eyes that she answered with a determined nod. "Very well," Theodore conceded, "but take your heaviest coat and come home the moment the rain lets up." Minutes later, Olivia and Jackson stepped out into the storm, huddled under the small porch roof as she fastened her rain cloak. "You didn't have to do this," Jackson said over the sound of the downpour. "It's miserable out here." "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "You were about to say something important back there, and I want to hear it, all of it." Jackson studied her face, raindrops falling from the brim of his hat. "Not here, come on." They hurried through the deluge toward the town hall, but Jackson led them instead to the marshal's office, which was closer and offered privacy the crowded town hall wouldn't. Once inside, he lit a lamp and stoked the small stove while Olivia removed her dripping cloak. "You're shivering," he observed, concern etched on his features. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her teeth chattered slightly. "Please, Jackson, what were you going to say at my father's house?" Jackson ran a hand through his damp hair, leaving it tousled in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm not good with words, Olivia. Never have been. You were doing just fine before we were interrupted," she encouraged gently. He moved closer, close enough that she could see droplets of rain still clinging to his eyelashes. "What I was trying to say is that I care for you. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise for either of us." Olivia's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Why isn't it wise? Because I'm a lawman with enemies and a wandering life. Because you deserve better than wondering every day if I'll come home alive." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Because I've never felt this way about anyone, and it terrifies me." "You think I'm not terrified too?" Olivia whispered. "I've spent weeks trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude or admiration." Hope flickered in Jackson's eyes. "And what do you feel?" Instead of answering with words, Olivia closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. It was bold, improper, and absolutely perfect. For a heartbeat, Jackson remained still, as if shocked by her action. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he returned her kiss with a restrained passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing in that street, braver than anyone in town." "I wasn't brave," Olivia confessed. "I was terrified." "But sometimes fear makes you do things you didn't know you could." "Like kissing a marshal in his office during a thunderstorm?" Jackson asked, a rare smile illuminating his features. Olivia laughed softly. "Exactly like that." Thunder cracked overhead, making the windows rattle, but neither paid it any mind. In that moment, the storm outside seemed distant and unimportant compared to the storm they'd weathered inside themselves to reach this point. "Your father will have my badge if he finds out about this," Jackson said, though he made no move to release her. "My father thinks very highly of you," Olivia assured him. "Though I suggest we approach him properly before any more impropriety occurs." Jackson nodded, reluctantly stepping back. "You're right. If I'm going to do this, I'll do it honorably." He took her hand in his. "Olivia Summers, may I court you properly, with your father's permission and all the respect you deserve?" The formal request, spoken in his deep voice, made Olivia's heart swell. "Yes, Jackson Gentry, you may." As the summer faded into autumn, Madisonville watched with interest as Marshal Gentry began formally courting the banker's daughter. Theodore Summers gave his blessing, though not without a serious conversation with Jackson about his intentions and future plans. "I won't pretend I haven't noticed the way you look at my daughter," Theodore had said during that private meeting in his study. "Or the way she lights up when you enter a room. But Olivia isn't just any young woman, Marshal. She's educated, independent, and accustomed to certain comforts." "I understand, sir," Jackson had replied. "I can't offer her wealth or an easy life, but I can promise to respect her mind and spirit, to never cage the independence that makes her who she is." Those words, more than anything else, had won Theodore over. He recognized in Jackson someone who truly saw his daughter for who she was, not who society expected her to be. Their courtship unfolded through crisp autumn days of horseback, rides along golden-leaved trails, and evenings by the fire discussing books Olivia recommended. Jackson proved to be more well-read than his taciturn manner suggested, having educated himself during long, solitary nights on the trail. One cool October afternoon, they rode to a scenic overlook above Madisonville. Aspen trees shimmered with yellow leaves against the backdrop of distant mountains, already dusted with early snow. They dismounted to stretch their legs, and Jackson spread a blanket for them to sit on while they shared the picnic Olivia had packed. "I received a telegram yesterday," Jackson said as they finished their meal, "from the territorial governor." Olivia felt a flicker of apprehension. Such communications usually meant Jackson was being called away on assignment. "What did it say?" "He's offering me a permanent position here, sheriff of the entire county, not just town marshal." Jackson watched her face carefully. "It would mean staying in Madisonville, setting down roots." Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest. "And what did you tell him?" "I said I needed to discuss it with someone whose opinion matters greatly to me." Jackson took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "What do you think, Olivia? Should I accept?" "You want to stay?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Jackson's gaze was steady, sure. "I want to be wherever you are. For the first time in my life, I've found a place and a person that feels like home." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes at his simple, heartfelt declaration. "Then yes, I think you should accept." Jackson nodded, a slow smile spreading across his features. Then, to Olivia's surprise, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, opening his palm to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's, the only thing I kept from my past life." Olivia's breath caught as Jackson moved to kneel before her, still holding the ring. "Olivia Summers, you heard me when I didn't even know I was calling out. You brought light back into a life I thought would always be shadowed. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up inside her like a spring. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jackson. I will." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he looked up, Olivia saw something she'd never witnessed before, tears shining in Jackson Gentry's eyes. She leaned down and kissed him, pouring all her love and certainty into the gesture. When they parted, Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Olivia," he murmured against her hair. "I think I have since that first morning when you stood in that street refusing to be silenced." "I love you too," she replied, marveling at how right it felt to say the words. "And I always will." As they rode back to town, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, Olivia felt a profound sense of rightness. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy. Jackson's job would still carry risks, and merging their different lives would require compromise from both, but they would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge since that fateful morning in July. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Madisonville. Most townsfolk were delighted, having watched the romance unfold with the interest small communities always show in matters of the heart. A few gossiped about the speed of the courtship, but even they couldn't deny the obvious devotion between the couple. Preparations for the wedding consumed the next 2 months. Olivia ordered a dress from Denver, and Theodore insisted on hosting the celebration at the town's grandest venue, the newly completed Madisonville Hotel. Jackson, for his part, seemed slightly bewildered by the fuss, but endured it good-naturedly for Olivia's sake. "I thought perhaps a simple ceremony," he mentioned one evening as they sat on the Summers' front porch, watching the first snow of winter dust the town. "Just us, your father and a preacher." Olivia laughed softly. "In a town this size, we'd never hear the end of it. Besides, Papa wants to give his only daughter a proper wedding." Jackson nodded, understanding though not entirely comfortable with being the center of such attention. "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy." "You make me happy," she said simply, leaning her head against his shoulder. He pressed a kiss to her hair, still marveling that this remarkable woman had chosen him. "Have you thought about where we'll live after the wedding? Your father mentioned the cottage on the edge of his property." "I've been meaning to discuss that with you," Olivia said, sitting up to look at him. "What would you think about building our own place? There's a lovely parcel of land for sale just outside town, close enough for your duties as sheriff but far enough to have some privacy." Jackson looked surprised. "You'd want to build? That's a big undertaking." "I know. But I love the idea of creating our home together, designing it exactly as we want." Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "A study for your work, a proper kitchen, bedrooms for our future family." The mention of children brought a tender expression to Jackson's face. "You want children, don't you?" Olivia asked, suddenly uncertain. "I never allowed myself to think about it," he admitted. "My life wasn't conducive to family, but now—" He took her hand, squeezing gently. "Yes, I'd like nothing more than to have a family with you, Olivia." Relief and happiness washed over her. "Then it's settled. We'll build our home and fill it with love and children and books. And at least one good guard dog," Jackson added with a smile. "And a garden," Olivia continued, warming to their shared vision. "I've always wanted space for herbs and vegetables." "A stable for our horses," Jackson contributed. "A wide front porch with rocking chairs." They continued like this, each adding details to the picture of their future home, their future life. It was a dream neither had dared to imagine before finding each other, a dream made possible because one brave woman had cried out for help, and one good man had stopped to listen. The wedding day arrived on a crisp December morning, with sunshine glinting off fresh snow and turning Madisonville into a winter wonderland. The hotel had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and countless candles. Nearly everyone in town attended, dressed in their finest clothes and buzzing with excitement. In a small room upstairs, Olivia stood before a mirror as Charlotte helped arrange her veil. Her wedding dress was ivory satin with delicate lace overlay, elegant without being ostentatious. Her copper hair was swept up with pearl pins, a few soft tendrils framing her face. "You look absolutely beautiful," Charlotte said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Her own baby girl, now 2 months old, slept peacefully in a nearby cradle. "Jackson won't know what hit him." "I'm so nervous," Olivia confessed, smoothing her hands over the satin skirt. "Which is ridiculous. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "It's perfectly normal," Charlotte assured her. "I nearly fainted before walking down the aisle to Owen." A knock at the door preceded Theodore's entrance. He stopped short when he saw his daughter, emotion making his voice rough. "Oh, Livy, you look just like your mother." Olivia blinked back tears. "Do I really?" The very image of her on our wedding day. Theodore crossed the room to take his daughter's hands. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, and so happy to see you marrying a man worthy of you." Charlotte discreetly left the room, giving father and daughter a private moment. "Are you sure, Papa?" Olivia asked quietly. "About Jackson being worthy. You've always wanted so much for me." "What I've always wanted is for you to be loved by someone who sees your true self and cherishes it," Theodore said firmly. "Jackson Gentry may not be the wealthy businessman I once imagined for you, but he's a man of integrity who looks at you like you hung the moon. That's worth more than any fortune." Olivia hugged her father tightly, careful not to crush her veil. "Thank you for understanding. I do love him so much." "I know you do. And now it's time to tell him so in front of God and everyone in Madisonville," Theodore said, offering his arm. "Are you ready?" Olivia took a deep breath and nodded. "I've been ready since the moment he bowed and said he heard me." Downstairs, Jackson stood at the front of the hotel's dining room, which had been cleared of tables and filled with chairs for the occasion. He wore a new black suit that felt stiff and formal compared to his usual attire, but he'd wanted to look his best for Olivia. His deputy stood beside him as best man, while the town's minister waited with an open Bible. Jackson had never been more nervous in his life, not during gunfights or manhunts, not even when he'd proposed. This moment felt monumental, a dividing line between the solitary existence he'd known and the shared life awaiting him. The small group of musicians began playing, and the assembled townsfolk rose to their feet, turning toward the doorway. Jackson's breath caught as Olivia appeared on her father's arm. She was radiant, more beautiful than he had words to describe. Their eyes met across the room, and everything else faded away: the crowd, the music, his nervousness. There was only Olivia, walking toward a future they would build together. When she reached him, Theodore placed her hand in Jackson's with a solemn nod before taking his seat. Olivia's fingers trembled slightly in his grasp, and Jackson squeezed gently, a silent reassurance that he felt exactly as overwhelmed as she did. The minister began the ceremony, his words washing over them as they stood hand in hand. When the time came for vows, Jackson had opted to write his own rather than repeat the traditional phrases. He took a deep breath, focusing solely on Olivia's face as he spoke from his heart. "Olivia, before you, my life was a straight road leading nowhere. I moved through the world doing what needed to be done, but never truly living." His voice was steady despite the emotion tightening his chest. "Then I heard your voice calling out, and everything changed. You showed me what courage looks like, what love feels like, what home means." Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes as he continued. "I vow to listen when you speak, and to hear what remains unspoken. I vow to protect you without stifling the strength that drew me to you. I vow to be your partner in all things, in joy and sorrow, in prosperity and hardship, in the daily work of building a life worthy of the love we share." Jackson's voice roughened. "I will love you until my last breath, Olivia Summers, and I will thank God every day for the moment you came into my life." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek as she began her own vows. "Jackson, I grew up surrounded by stories of knights and heroes, but never believed I would meet one until the day you stopped when no one else would. You showed me what true courage is: not fearlessness, but acting despite your fears." She squeezed his hands tightly, her voice clear and sure. "I vow to be your safe harbor in your adventure. I vow to stand beside you in all your battles, whether against outlaws or the shadows of your past. I vow to build with you a home filled with laughter, love, and understanding." Her voice softened. "I vow to remind you every day that you are heard, you are seen, and you are loved beyond measure. Whatever roads lie ahead, we will walk them together, hand in hand and heart in heart, until death parts us, and perhaps even beyond." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as they exchanged rings. Jackson's a simple gold band, Olivia's designed to complement her engagement ring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson cupped Olivia's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the depth of his feeling. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was dancing, feasting, and toasting, with even the most reserved townsfolk joining in the festivity. Jackson surprised everyone, especially Olivia, by being a remarkably good dancer, a skill he attributed to his mother's insistence that no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly lead a lady around a dance floor. As the night drew to a close, the newlyweds slipped away to a special suite. The hotel had prepared for them their first night together as husband and wife, before they departed the next day for a brief honeymoon in Denver. Alone at last, with the sounds of the continuing celebration muffled by thick walls, Jackson gathered Olivia into his arms. "Mrs. Gentry," he murmured against her lips. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Olivia replied, her arms winding around his neck. "Though I warn you, I intend to still use Summers for bank business. I've worked too hard establishing my reputation to change it now." Jackson chuckled, the sound vibrating against her chest. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Your independence is one of the many things I love about you." His expression grew serious as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Are you happy, Olivia?" "Truly, happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "And this is just the beginning." Spring arrived in Madisonville with its usual burst of wildflowers and renewed energy. The harsh Wyoming winter finally released its grip, allowing Jackson and Olivia to break ground on their new home. They had purchased 5 acres just outside town, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy, with a small stream running along one edge and a magnificent view of the mountains from the highest point. The building proceeded steadily through the spring and summer, with Jackson working alongside the hired carpenters whenever his sheriff duties allowed. Olivia visited the site daily, bringing lunch and offering input on everything from the placement of windows to the design of the kitchen cabinets. By late September, exactly 9 months after their wedding, the house was complete enough to move in, though some finishing work remained. It was everything they had dreamed of that snowy evening on the porch, a sturdy 2-story home with a wide front porch, spacious rooms filled with light, and thoughtful touches that reflected both their personalities. Jackson had insisted on solid construction and practical features, while Olivia had ensured beauty wasn't sacrificed for function. The timing of their move was fortuitous, as Olivia had another piece of news to share, news she'd suspected for several weeks, but had only recently confirmed with Doc Miller. She waited until their first night in the new house, after they'd unpacked essential items and enjoyed a simple meal by lamplight at their new dining table. "What do you think of the spare bedroom upstairs?" she asked casually as they sat together on the sofa before the fireplace. "The one next to ours," Jackson considered the question, arm draped comfortably around her shoulders. "It's a good size. Were you thinking of making it a guest room?" "Eventually, perhaps," Olivia said, turning slightly to face him, "but I had a different use in mind first." "Oh." Jackson raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. Olivia took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "I think it would make a lovely nursery, starting around April, I believe." It took a moment for understanding to dawn on Jackson's face. When it did, his expression transformed with wonder and joy. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "are you saying—" "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Doc Miller says everything looks perfectly healthy." Jackson pulled her into a gentle embrace, burying his face against her neck. When he finally drew back, Olivia was stunned to see tears on his cheeks, the first she'd ever seen him shed. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said, his hand returning to rest protectively over their growing child. "A home, a wife I adore, and now a baby. It's more than I ever dared hope for." "You deserve every happiness, Jackson," Olivia said, cupping his face in her hands. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget that." The news of the impending addition to the Gentry family spread through Madisonville with predictable speed. Theodore was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, immediately beginning plans for a woodworking project, a cradle. He decided, crafted from the finest cherry wood he could obtain. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Jackson grew even more protective, though he was careful not to smother her independence. He made sure she had help with household tasks when needed and took over more of her responsibilities at the bank when fatigue became an issue in her later months. Winter settled over Wyoming once again, but the Gentry home remained warm and full of anticipation. They spent the cold evenings preparing for their child's arrival, Olivia sewing tiny garments, while Jackson read aloud from books on childcare and education that she'd ordered from back east. One such evening, as snow fell softly outside their windows, Olivia looked up from her sewing to find Jackson watching her with a tender expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, setting aside the small gown she was hemming. "About how different this winter is from last year," he replied, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "Last December, I was still adjusting to the idea of staying in one place, of having someone in my life who mattered more than the job. And now—" Olivia prompted, leaning into his embrace as his arm came around her. "Now I can't imagine any other life," Jackson said simply. "You and this little one," he placed his hand on her rounded belly. "You're everything to me. Even though I wake you up at odd hours demanding pickles," she teased. "Even then," he confirmed with a smile. "Though I confess, riding to the general store at midnight in a blizzard for pickles was a challenge I hadn't anticipated in married life." Olivia laughed, then gasped as a strong kick pressed against Jackson's palm. "Did you feel that?" Someone's awake and eager to join the conversation. Jackson's eyes widened in amazement, as they did every time he felt their child move. "Strong kick. Maybe we have a future sheriff on our hands. Or a banker," Olivia countered. "Or a teacher, or a doctor, or whatever else they might dream of becoming." "Whatever they choose, they'll have our support," Jackson said with conviction. "And our love." "Always," Olivia agreed, resting her head against his shoulder as they sat together, three hearts beating in perfect harmony as the snow continued to fall outside their window. When April arrived, it brought warm breezes, spring flowers, and the birth of James Theodore Gentry, a healthy, robust boy with his mother's copper hair and his father's blue eyes. The labor was difficult but ultimately uncomplicated, with Jackson refusing to leave Olivia's side despite the midwife's initial protests. His steady presence gave Olivia strength through the long hours, and when their son finally arrived with a lusty cry, the look of awestruck wonder on Jackson's face as he held his child for the first time was something Olivia knew she would remember forever. "Hello, James," he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms. "I'm your papa." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. James grew into a curious, adventurous toddler who kept his parents constantly alert. Jackson settled fully into his role as county sheriff, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity that spread throughout the territory. Olivia divided her time between motherhood, managing their home, and working part-time at the bank, where her financial acumen had become invaluable to her aging father. 2 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Charlotte Rose, named for Olivia's dear friend and the wild roses that grew along the stream on their property. Their family felt complete, their home filled with the chaos and joy that young children bring. Life wasn't without challenges. Jackson's job occasionally brought danger close to home, and there were nights when Olivia paced the floor waiting for his return from pursuing outlaws or breaking up disputes in the increasingly prosperous mining camps that dotted the county. But he always came back to her, and each reunion strengthened the bond between them. On a warm evening in the summer of 1883, 8 years after they first met, Jackson and Olivia sat on their front porch watching James and Charlotte chase fireflies in the twilight. Theodore, now retired from banking and living in a comfortable cottage they had built for him on their property, dozed in a rocking chair nearby. "Do you ever think about that day?" Olivia asked softly, her head resting on Jackson's shoulder. "When we first met," Jackson's arm tightened around her. "Often. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd ridden into town just 5 minutes later." "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Olivia said. "Some things are meant to be." "Maybe so," Jackson conceded, "but I'm grateful it happened exactly as it did." Your voice calling out, everyone else turning away. "And you stopping to listen," Olivia finished. "My hero in the nick of time." Jackson smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I wasn't looking to be anyone's hero that day, just doing my job." "That's what makes you a true hero," Olivia said, sitting up to look into his eyes still as blue and captivating as the day they met. "You heard someone in need when others wouldn't. You acted when others turned away." Before Jackson could respond, James came running up the porch steps, clutching a jar with several glowing fireflies inside. "Look, Papa, I caught 7. "Well done, son," Jackson praised, pulling the boy onto his lap. "But remember what we discussed about keeping wild things captive." James's expression grew serious. "That they belong to the sky and the trees, not in jars. I'll let them go before bed, I promise." Charlotte toddled up after her brother, arms raised for Olivia to lift her. "Mama, stars fell down," she said in wonder, pointing to the fireflies dancing across the yard. "It does look that way, doesn't it?" Olivia agreed, settling her daughter on her hip. "But they're actually tiny insects with special lights in their tails." "Magic bugs," Charlotte declared decisively, nestling against her mother. Jackson caught Olivia's eye over their children's heads, his expression full of contentment and love. This was the life neither had imagined possible that fateful morning in Madisonville, a life built on courage, respect, and the simple act of one person stopping to listen when another called for help. As the sky darkened and stars emerged alongside the fireflies, Jackson thought about how a single moment of connection had altered the course of so many lives. Not just his and Olivia's, but their children's, Theodore's, and even the town's, which had grown more compassionate under their influence. "I love you," he said quietly to Olivia as their children's excitement gradually calmed. "Today and always." "And I love you," she replied, reaching for his hand and squeezing it gently. "My cowboy who heard me when no one else would." In the years that followed, their story became something of a legend in Madisonville, how the brave woman's cries went unheeded until a lone lawman stopped to listen. How their love transformed not just their lives but the heart of the community itself. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to hear them, truly hear them when they call out in need. Jackson and Olivia lived to see their children grow into adults who carried forward their values of courage, compassion, and unwavering integrity. James eventually followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a respected lawman in his own right, while Charlotte pursued education, establishing Madisonville's first proper school and ensuring that future generations would learn not just reading and arithmetic, but also the importance of listening to voices that might otherwise go unheard. Through all the seasons of their life together, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, Jackson and Olivia remained each other's strongest advocates and deepest loves, a testament to what can grow from a single moment of human connection, when one person has the courage to cry out, and another the wisdom to listen.